John Blake presents Manhunt, the Night Stalker, written by Colin Sutton and read by Peter Noble. Author's note: I will not use the true name for any of the victims in this account. Although almost all have now passed on, I believe that to respect their memories, I should maintain their anonymity. Prologue. Delroy Grant, dubbed the Night Stalker, was one of the nation's most wanted men, a shocking sex predator. During his 17-year reign of fear, he established a clear MO: target an elderly woman living alone, visit them at night, remove a window pane and slide in, unscrew the light bulbs, cut the power at the electricity meter, rip out the telephone wires, tiptoe to the bedroom, wake the victim by shining a torch in their eyes, while ensuring their silence with a gloved hand across their mouth. What followed, for his terrified victims, was an unspeakable ordeal, often lasting hours, heavy with the threat of sexual violence, even in the cases where he controlled himself. His crimes had dreadful consequences, of which his victims spoke with courage and heart-rending simplicity. "This has ruined the winter years of my mother's life," said one victim's son. "I don't have nightmares now, but I make sure I take certain measures. I have to leave a light on. I make sure all the doors and windows are locked, even in the summer. I cannot sleep if they are open, because I think he will be able to get back in," said another victim, aged 84. "I cannot emphasize enough my feelings of embarrassment and humiliation during the attack and after. I feared for my life. I believed I was going to be murdered," remembered one more victim, aged 88. On a crisp, dry November night in 2009, the surveillance sergeant was controlling his team from the back of the convoy. Not that anybody looking on would have realized it was a convoy, or at least that was the plan, despite the fact that, unusually, one of the police cars had deliberately been piloted by an alert officer to a position in front of the target vehicle. He was remaining unseen, but effectively slowing everything down so that those desperately trying to catch up behind had a better chance. They had closed in on the grey Vauxhall Zafira, despite it being enthusiastically driven at more than 60 miles per hour at times, except, of course, for when it passed the speed cameras. Its driver was far too smart to attract unnecessary attention that way. The Zafira was now about 3 miles from the observation area, far enough away from where it had first been spotted for the driver not to connect the coming police request to stop with where he had been, and more importantly, with what he had been doing just 15 minutes previously. If it turned out he was not the right man, then there was still a good chance that the huge observation going on in a vast swathe of southeast London would remain a secret, and that was vital to the operation. The one thing which the team simply could not risk was their surveillance leaking out. As the Zafira signalled to turn into Witham Road, a residential street off Elmer's End Road by Birkbeck Railway Station, it was time to move in. Following him unnoticed would be quite difficult in the maze of quiet side streets, and if the driver was who they suspected, who they hoped, then he might even be seeking another target. After all, suburban streets at the dead of night, that was his hunting ground. "Go, go, go, take him now," spat the team leader into the covert microphone mounted on his sun visor, the words causing his heart to race a little, as they always did, no matter how many times he'd said them. Its highly trained driver responded instantly, and the anonymous dark green Ford Mondeo came alive, overtaking 2 carloads of colleagues and moving to within inches of its quarry. The wail of the siren and the flood of blue LEDs bullied the Zafira driver into braking sharply as he pulled to the curb. That driver was Delroy Grant, a 52-year-old Jamaican who had lived for almost all his life in England. He was no stranger to the police in his youth, but had apparently kept out of trouble for almost 20 years. Nevertheless, he knew he had plenty to hide, and so, albeit unconvincingly, he said his name was Kelvin Grant. But sorry, officers, I don't have any ID with me. The Zafira being registered to the Motability scheme was no help in instantly verifying his identity, so the officers began to search through the car. When, in the center console, they found some bank cards in the name of Delroy Grant and his wife Jennifer, he knew that he had to tell the truth, that if he maintained the lie, he faced arrest anyway on suspicion of stealing the cards, so he decided to come clean. But naturally, those who give false names to police often have something to hide. Knowing the score, he had probably imagined what was going to happen. When the officers told him he was being arrested, he reacted in a quietly compliant manner, despite knowing deep down that at last his game was very probably up. The clothing, crowbar, and balaclava in the car, his strange attire with multiple layers on top and bottom, and the telling discovery of a small, powerful torch in his trouser pocket would see to that. At that point, he would have had no idea that he had been tailed all the way from Shirley, where, the officers had been told by their invisible colleagues, he had been trying to break into a bungalow. All of which, of course, was really of incidental evidential consequence. He was intelligent enough to know that this was it. The day he had long feared, but which he had always tried his utmost to postpone, had arrived. He had had a good run. Only one close call in 17 years. But once he gave his DNA, that would be it. A cotton wool bud dragged across his cheek through his gaping mouth by a rubber-gloved hand. That was all that would be needed to prove that his time was up. That he was indeed the Night Stalker. Chapter 1. Can you just take a look? There is an old joke in the police that if you go away on holiday, you might find yourself transferred when you get back. It was not quite as stark as that, but 3 absences I had in 2009 resulted in some quite momentous changes in my professional life, and might ultimately have affected when, and even if, the Night Stalker were to be captured. First, I took a day off when our new superintendent came to visit my team at Barnes. On my return, I was told that my latest boss was not impressed with the way I had decorated my desks and surroundings in the office. The room was open plan, and I shared a space at the end of the long office at Jubilee House, Putney, with my detective inspectors. The team had christened it the Executive Lounge and erected notices to that effect. I had 4 desks or tables, and in an effort to personalize my space, in common with many who have their own workspace, there were the photographs of my children. But there were also some unusual mementos, a small Scalextric-type circuit with 2 racing minis, and a micro-sized dartboard, both of which had been birthday gifts from my children. And in pride of place, hanging from the ceiling above me, a plastic flying pig, battery-operated, which would fly around in tethered circles when switched on. This I occasionally used during meetings, to emphasize my view that what I was being told really would not happen. Evidently, the superintendent had felt these were unbefitting of a senior investigating officer, SIO. Maybe that was correct, but I could not help thinking that the objections should have been raised with me, personally, rather than vicariously through my junior officers. Whether this really quite minor irritation initiated a question mark against me and my team, I shall never know. But what happened a few weeks later that Easter left me in no doubt that we were firmly in somebody's sights. We had been on call, a status that lasted from 7 a.m. Tuesday to 7 a.m. the following Tuesday. It meant that we had a long weekend off to follow, although, as it was Easter weekend, we would in any case have been on leave Friday to Monday. During the week, we had dealt with the initial response to 9 murders, handing 8 over to other investigation teams, but for the other, retaining responsibility for the investigation ourselves. It had gone well. My team, by then, was just so experienced and skillful that it was more than a match for any criminal. They solved the case quickly, charging the murderer within 48 hours of the call. It had been a busy week, long hours and with little rest, juggling the need to respond at the scenes of new suspicious deaths, with the flurry of activity involved in the first days of a murder investigation. By Thursday afternoon, there were whispered suggestions throughout the office that a visit to the pub after work would be in order. I would usually always tag along for a bit, feeling really it was part of my role as leader. But on this occasion I had too much to do at home. Appreciating, though, that it was just what the team needed, I announced at about 3 p.m. that they should go. It was not much of a concession. Almost all of them were due to finish at 4 p.m. anyway. But it was the least they deserved after their sterling efforts of the past 7 days. So while the greater part of the team adjourned to the Jolly Gardeners, I drove down the A3, beating the rush hour traffic, to arrive home around 4 p.m. Within half an hour, I was called by DI Sarah Reese. She had been at court and so had not gone to the pub. Arriving back at the office, she had found the place deserted except for the superintendent. She told me that she was being asked where everyone was. I said I would speak to the boss and explain. She made him the offer, but astoundingly, he was unwilling to talk to me. I told Sarah to relay that they were probably all at the pub, that they deserved it after their Herculean efforts during the week from hell, and that, to thank them personally, perhaps the solution would be to join them and get a round in. At 8 p.m., Sarah called me again. The superintendent had been with her at the office for a full 3 hours, making her go through in some detail the current situation of all our outstanding investigations, our budgets, etc. Everything that was ultimately my responsibility, and which I would have expected my supervisor to have wanted to pick over with me. Sarah added that she got the impression there was an agenda. She was a relatively new addition to my team, and I didn't know how much faith to place in her judgment. Nevertheless, I considered my cards well and truly marked. My relationship with the superintendent was thereafter pretty frosty. This didn't stop my team being turned to when a quick and decisive result was required for a high-profile gang murder well off our patch in East London. A black teenager stabbed to death at a time when gang violence in the capital was a really hot potato. We delivered it for him very quickly, thanks in most part to some stunning witness handling work by 2 of my most experienced detective sergeants. Nevertheless, I was under no illusion that this choice was pragmatic rather than a signal of improved regard. I carried on doing my job to the best of my ability as usual, but official meetings and even social occasions where I had to be in the company of my immediate manager became things for me to dread. In early April 2009, I went on holiday for a week. It had been booked for some time and therefore couldn't be rearranged to enable me to meet the recently installed boss of London Homicide, Chief Superintendent Hamish Campbell, when he came for a review the fleet meeting on taking over the command. Not that he would have expected me to drop everything for that. On my return, I found a pleasant email from him, explaining how he had enjoyed his visit, how he found the team to be in good spirits and well motivated, and that he would like me to come and see him so he and I could meet properly. It was in stark contrast to the checkup visit from the superintendent at Easter, and accurately reflected their very different leadership styles. I made a quick call to his PA, and I was booked in for a morning meeting at Scotland Yard a couple of days later. Hamish Campbell was a very experienced investigator, perhaps best known by colleagues and the public as the SIO who led the Jill Dando murder investigation. Tall, balding, well-groomed and well-spoken, he welcomed me with a cup of coffee and began chatting generally about the murder command, outstanding cases, and, inevitably, my team's success with serial killer Levi Belfield. The whole meeting seemed nothing out of the ordinary, really. A predictable and friendly catch-up. But then came a question I had not expected. What do you know about Operation Minstead? I know that it has been going a long time, a long series of rapes of the elderly in their homes. I know Simon Morgan is the SIO, and that there is DNA. That's about it. That basic idea of the operation was, I am sure, a pretty common one among those who were not involved in it. It is interesting to me now, looking back, that the general understanding focused on the rapes. It would only be much later, when I read the whole sad story, that I was to realize Minstead, as usual a place name chosen from the Gazetteer of Great Britain, in this case a small village near Lyndhurst in the New Forest, was a great deal more complicated than that. Yes, it is something about which the Commissioner is deeply concerned. He has suggested to me that it ought to be a priority for the command, and I thought that given you have a recent record of success in a high-profile case involving a serial sex offender, you might be able to use your investigative acumen to bring something to the table. And when the Commissioner suggests, there was no need for me to finish the sentence. The smile it drew from my boss showed that he understood it as much as I did. I hesitated. While it was reassuring to be spoken of in those terms by the new chief superintendent, I was not clear exactly what he might be suggesting. With a degree of naivety, I asked, "Do you mean my team taking it on as our investigation, or just for me to do a review of what they've got?" "No, a review, definitely just a review. By you alone. An investigative review to see if there are any opportunities to catch him that might have been missed." "But surely, I know it has been reviewed lots of times. Indeed, did I not see that the Serious Crime Review Group had just recently embarked upon another one?" "Yes, they did. But I don't mean the sort of administrative review that checks every dot and comma in the Holmes, Home Office Large Major Inquiry System, account. That's not what I need to know. Not what we need to find out. I want you to cut through all the extraneous stuff and look at the investigation, the leads, the intelligence, the possible lines of inquiry, a fresh set of eyes, you know. That sort of review, one with a practical purpose far beyond housekeeping, appealed to me. I thought for a moment how Hamish must have done his homework, that he knew what made me tick. He had captured my interest almost immediately, and closed the deal as he went on. Some of them have been so close to it for so long, there just might be something they're missing. You've got plenty of initiative, you can be a little creative. Can you just take a look? My initial reaction was that there was nothing for me to lose in taking, as he put it, a look. So I agreed there and then, suggesting that I would do some research into the crimes and the investigation for a few days, before he announced to the Minstead team that I would be coming. We both knew, though it went unsaid, that I probably would not be all that welcome. SIOs are notoriously protective of their own operations, and all the more so when it is one to which they have dedicated years of their career. Who, in any profession, would relish the idea of a peer picking over every last detail of their, as yet unsuccessful, work? I went back to the office at Putney, where I asked Clive Grace, now my intelligence DS, to print me out a few things to be getting on with, and then just tried to keep working as normal. I was in part excited at the prospect of getting to grips with such a difficult and important investigation, and yet in part terrified that I would fail, and, in some ways blemished the record and reputation I'd worked so hard to earn in the Levi Belfield cases. That investigation, over 3 long years and culminating in a 5-month trial, had sent that most predatory and infamous of serial murderers to prison forever, 3 times over, for the murders of Marsha McDonnell, Amélie Delagrange, and Millie Dowler. I knew I would forever be remembered as the detective who had led the team that put him away. But even that great success had not completely eradicated my self-doubt. I was 48 years old, 2 years away from the end of a police career in which many would argue I had achieved great things. Yet still, faced with a difficult and very public challenge, my initial reaction was that I might not be up to it. The other striking feeling I had was more sadness than fear. I knew in my heart this would be the final case on my workload, the last team I would lead. This time round, though, I found it much easier to deal with and rationalize. After all, it was really an assignment with no personal risk to me. All I had to do was have a look through the papers, talk to the team, and then see if I could suggest anything to help. If I found something useful, all well and good. If I came up with nothing, there would be no shame for me. The case had confounded a number of highly skilled and experienced senior investigators over many years, hadn't it? It is very unusual, unknown even, for any gossip relating to staff moves or responsibilities to remain a secret for long in the Metropolitan Police. There are just too many people involved in the planning. The news leaks effortlessly out, and at every level, other people's careers seem always to be a topic of conversation. It was therefore no surprise to me, just a few days later, when DC Gary Cunningham sidled up to me in the Boathouse pub next door after work and asked if the rumors were true. What rumors would they be then, Gary? That you're leaving us to take over as SIO on Minstead? I didn't want to lie to him. And also, as he was one of the very best officers out of the excellent team I had, it had occurred to me that he might be willing to come across and help me. So I replied with a pretty straight bat. I have been asked to go and take a look, do a sort of review, see if there might be another way of solving it. You never know. I might well need some help from somebody I trust. Gary was much more direct in his reply. No way I'd want to be involved in that poisoned chalice. They're doing you up like a kipper, boss. Getting rid of you, smashing up the team. But not only that, they got you moved over to the biggest crock of shit in existence. You've got no chance of succeeding. I told you after the trial. Nobody ever needed to say the Belfield trial. It was always just the trial. It was a shame you couldn't retire then. I smiled at his analysis, which, for all I knew, might have been spot on. But I'd already realized that a desire was still burning in me. Don't write me off yet, Gary. It's a shame we can't all do it together as a team again. But I think I'm a bit like George Foreman or Joe Bugner, an aging heavyweight who everyone thinks is past it. But I'm pretty sure I've still got one more fight left in me. And in my own mind, I was certain that fight was about to begin.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.